Her phone buzzed with a final message that tasted of desperation. Tonight, on this private beach, she realized obsession was far darker than any heartbreak she had known. One more sunset would seal their fate. Why are you shaking, Marianna? You've dreamed of standing with me at dusk. Dreamed? She gritted her teeth. Stop pretending you ever cared beyond your sick need to keep me at your mercy. He scoffed, stepping closer. Jealousy suits you, you know, always wondering who else I've been watching. She flung the glare over her shoulder. At least I don't hide in the shadows, begging for scraps of affection. You came, didn't you? You can't forget about me any more than I can forget about you. Her voice shook with fury. I'm done paying the price for your twisted devotion. Next time we meet, it'll be for the last heartbreak you'll ever give me. Chapter 1. Whispers in the Dark. Marianna pressed her forehead against the cool glass of her bedroom window, staring at the city lights scattered across the horizon. She preferred seeing what lay outside rather than being caught by surprise. A new habit from old wounds. 3 months had passed since her breakup with Adrian. The word no longer stung, but the memory felt like an open seam in her life. Her empty apartment echoed with the silence of nights once filled with conversation. Startled by her own reflection, Marianna saw a haggard face and wondered if heartbreak could truly hollow the eyes and etch tension into every line. Resentment brewed beneath the surface, refusing to fade with time. She closed the blinds, their raspy reminder of her unease. A chirp from her phone drew her attention. A message from an unknown number. A single black heart emoji. Dread curled in her stomach. Could it be Adrian or someone else entirely? The strangeness began a week ago with a cryptic note on her car. You deserve more than lost love. Unsigned and unsettling. More notes followed, each intimate yet disquieting. Marianna showed one to Clara, her best friend, who advised her to keep them. Hesitant to discard them, she placed them in a wooden box once used for keepsakes, now holding these ominous tokens. In the kitchen, Marianna sipped lukewarm tea, hoping its warmth would soothe her tension. The black heart on her phone seemed to confirm her privacy was being invaded. A sudden knock at her door made her jump. It was Clara, her concerned face framed by a messy ponytail. Clara, Marianna said, relieved. I wasn't expecting you. I had a weird feeling, Clara replied, glancing around. How are you holding up? Marianna sighed. Fine, I guess. The letters are still coming tonight. I got a text at Black Heart. Clara frowned. You better be careful. This isn't normal. They sat in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. Marianna confessed how her breakdowns often came at night, the cryptic notes intruding on her thoughts. Though she tried to dismiss them, Clara insisted she couldn't ignore someone possibly obsessed with her. I keep expecting them to stop, Marianna admitted. But the text tonight, someone is definitely watching. Clara squeezed her hand. We'll figure it out, maybe talk to the police. Marianna hesitated. I haven't been directly threatened, they're just messages. Harassment takes many forms. They have your number, that's serious. Marianna's heart raced. Part of me wants to believe it's Adrian regretting leaving. Would you want that? Clara asked gently. No, Marianna whispered. Not like this. Her phone vibrated again. A new text from the unknown number. I see you close the blinds. Why hide? How do they know? Marianna gasped. It must be close by, Clara said, fear in her voice. Adrenaline surged through Marianna. Even with the curtains drawn, she felt exposed, 1,000 eyes pressing in from the darkness. Clara squeezed her shoulder. We'll talk to someone. Stay at my place tonight. Marianna reread the message, her composure fragile. All right, I refuse to keep living in fear. Outside the night pressed in, but defiance stirred within Marianna. She was unwilling to let vulnerability define her. Locking her door, she heard a faint rustle, like shadows retreating. Heartbreak hadn't numbed her completely. She could still feel fear and fight. As a tear traced her cheek, she vowed not to let darkness hold her captive. For now, she would keep the lights on, hoping their glow would keep whispers at bay. Chapter 2. Sunset Revelations. Marianna admired the blazing sunsets of the hidden cove, but tonight, the fiery sky offered no comfort. Stepping onto the secluded beach, memories of happier times with Samuel haunted her. The betrayal she uncovered last year lingered, each step closer to the water's edge, a reminder of her shattered trust. A breeze stung her face, and she paused at the shoreline, burdened by months of suspicion. Samuel was gone, yet the betrayal still bled. She tried to shake off the sorrow, focusing on the sunset, a symbol of endings that could be beautiful. Her phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. An anonymous message read, "You don't have to hurt alone anymore. Let me be your night's comfort." Alarmed, Marianna scanned the beach. The message felt like an unsettling vow. Alone, she wondered if it was a coincidence, but doubt persisted. She longed to confide in someone but struggled to trust after Samuel. His excuses replayed in her mind, reminding her she had underestimated the signs. Walking further, she reached a private alcove where Samuel once left her a conch shell, a token of love now tainted by heartbreak. The day she discovered his infidelity replayed in her mind, a memory she couldn't shake. The unknown sender's messages had grown more intimate, each one unsettling. "Let me be your night's comfort," twisted in her mind, an invitation both caring and possessive. Despite dread, curiosity stirred within her. As she neared the water's edge, the tide beckoned. Stars appeared overhead, as she contemplated letting go of her fears and trusting again. Yet, each message chipped away at her composure, making her feel claimed. Her phone buzzed again. "I'm closer than you think." Startled, she thought she saw a figure retreat behind the rocks. Fear and anger intertwined as she considered her options, run or confront her past and present. The beach no longer comforted her. It was a stage for revelations she wasn't ready to face. As darkness fell, Marianna clung to hope, determined not to let her past define her future, despite the fear that loomed just beyond the sunset. Chapter 3. Jealousy's Grip. Marianna woke to the sharp buzz of her phone. She tried to ignore it, pressing her face into the pillow as if to shut out the world. But the near-constant pinging had become something she could no longer dismiss as random. The morning sunlight filtered through her curtains, illuminating the proof of what her heart had tried to deny. There was a new message from the admirer, another string of cloying words, tipping just beyond the boundary of polite affection. Her instincts urged her to block the number, but she couldn't quite bring herself to do it. Something about these messages made her uneasy, yet she found herself glancing at each incoming text with an odd mixture of anxiety and curiosity. She reminded herself of her promise, not to let her life be ruled by someone else's toxic fixation. She had made that vow only days before, after the last tense encounter that left her feeling more violated than flattered. Still, it was easier said than done. Even as she forced herself to rise and fix breakfast, the swirl of intrusive thoughts fogged her mind. Each beep of her phone made her heart race. Every time a shadow flickered across her window, she felt her pulse quicken. She hated feeling trapped in her own home, haunted by a devotion she had never sought. At work, Marianna perched at her desk, her shoulders tense. She prayed for a distraction, any pressing deadline that would demand her full attention. Yet the admirer's presence weighed on her consciousness like a heavy blanket. A group email arrived, calling a meeting for later that day. As the office air conditioner whirred overhead, she found her gaze flitting from her computer screen to each colleague's face, searching for signs of guilt. Could a coworker be behind these texts? She had trusted her circle once, yet now she questioned whether some hidden motive lurked beneath seemingly friendly exchanges. Her paranoia stretched the edges of her composure, threatening to snap. Lila, her closest friend, passed by and offered a sympathetic smile, but Marianna couldn't fully return it. Was Layla secretly orchestrating all this, or in communication with someone who might be? The very thought felt absurd. Layla had been nothing but a rock when Marianna's world shifted. Yet with suspicion creeping into every corner of Marianna's life, no one was free of the stain of doubt. She hated it, hated herself for entertaining thoughts that someone dear could be an agent of distress. But she also couldn't deny the surge of jealousy and fear any longer. At home that evening, she tried to unwind by lighting a scented candle and running a bath. The warm water offered fleeting comfort, but her phone, perched on the counter, seemed to taunt her. She had left it on silent. She had every intention of ignoring it, but her eyes would drift to its screen, half expecting it to flash with new threats or erroneous proclamations of love. A memory came unbidden. That night on the beach, the hush of the tide overshadowed by an unsettling sense of being watched. Now, in the supposed safety of her own bathroom, she felt the same prickling awareness. Finally, she finished her bath and tapped the phone awake, only to find yet another message waiting. This time, the admirer spoke of how they admired her from afar, details that revealed they must have seen her just this morning outside the cafe. They mentioned her new lilac sweater, how it highlighted her hair in the golden light of dawn, all written in a manner so intimate, so disturbingly precise, that she felt a chill. They must have been much closer than she ever suspected. Her first instinct was to call the police, but a burst of panic stopped her. What if she was overreacting? What if that only provoked the admirer further? She placed the phone face down on the countertop, her breathing shallow, her thoughts racing. She felt powerless. Instead of confidence, paranoia swelled within, demanding she question every decision. Later that week, she booked a session with a counselor. She arrived with trembling hands, half expecting the admirer to be waiting around every corner. In the cozy office, she poured out everything, the texts, the flowers delivered without a note, the sense that someone followed her moves from the shadows. The counselor's gentle questions prompted her to consider that maybe this obsession wasn't just about physical safety, it was a powerful psychological hold too. And that, Marianna realized, was where jealousy's grip had truly taken root. She was no longer just afraid of being stalked, she felt overshadowed by an all-consuming presence that claimed to know her better than she knew herself. However, therapy offered only temporary relief. By the time she stepped outside into the crisp air, the tension had already returned. The knowledge that her admirer could be anywhere, observing, made her feel like a spectacle. She yearned to run, to hide in some nameless town, and wash her hands of this entire nightmare. But she also wondered, with a terrifying turn of imagination, if the admirer had latched onto someone else in her circle. Someone who might feed them details or share glimpses of her schedule. Trust, once so natural, now felt like a naive luxury. Her spiraling doubts spilled into her relationships. She snapped at her longtime friend Naomi for texting her the night before, accusing her of prying and warning her not to get too familiar with her private life. Shocked, Naomi recoiled, demanding to know why Marianna was acting so strangely. Marianna fumbled for an apology, but it came out clumsy and half-hearted. She was too disturbed, too haunted by the possibility that anyone, everyone, could be fueling this dangerous fixation. At one point, she even withdrew from Richard, who had been supportive since the beginning. Whenever he asked about her day or tried to cradle her trembling hands in his, she would stiffen, second-guessing his intentions. Her jealousy pressed from the inside, a confusing mixture of fear that he might be the target of someone else's attention, and a twisted suspicion that he might be involved on some level. She hated feeling so on edge, yet couldn't quell the swirl of dread. As the days passed, her admirer's messages gained a more disquieting tone. Strange references to her childhood dog, or her grandmother's old ring, suggested the person knew details she hadn't shared in years. How deep did this obsession go? Marianna battled with these questions each time she scanned a text. Meanwhile, every uneasy glance from others convinced her that her meltdown was obvious, that people were whispering about her deteriorating composure. In truth, her anxiety colored each interaction, making innocent words sound accusatory or vaguely threatening. Reclaiming normalcy suddenly felt like an impossible task. One stormy evening, Marianna heard a soft tapping at her door. She froze, half believing it could be the admirer. When she finally peered through the peephole, no one was there, just the wind and the swirling leaves stuck to the front step. The incident rattled her more than she wanted to admit. It embodied all her pent-up fears, the fear of something lurking, the dread of confrontation waiting just beyond her threshold. She retreated to her bedroom, flicked off every light, and sat in the darkness. Her breath hitched with each flicker of lightning outside. She realized that she was gradually losing herself to this twisted dynamic, shaped by terror on one side, and an odd sense of jealousy on the other. A jealousy of not knowing her admirer's identity, or how they flew so invisibly through her life, gleaning bits of her history without giving her a clue who they really were. This knowledge, or lack thereof, cut her deeper than any physical threat. She pressed her hands against her face, wishing for the 1000th time that she could simply shut this all away by smashing her phone or moving to a new city. But running wasn't an option, and in her heart, she knew it wouldn't solve the problem. The time for conflict was nearing. She realized that her fear and suspicion had bled into every relationship she held dear. If she didn't confront whoever was tormenting her, she would destroy herself from within. The tension, the paranoia, and the rage in her chest grew too big to contain. As thunder rumbled overhead, Marianna made a silent vow that the next time her admirer stepped forward, be it through another unsettling text or something far more brazen, she would not shrink back. She would look her demons in the eye. For better or worse, she had reached the point of no return. Chapter 4. A Final Heartbreak. Evening's last warmth lingered on the shoreline as Marianna stepped onto the damp sand, her heart hammering with unresolved tension. The muted glow of the setting sun etched her silhouette against the pale horizon, each foamy wave tugging at her shins as though beckoning her to relinquish all caution. She had come here with no illusions left. Every hope of gentle closure vanished when the admirer's final message demanded this meeting. Breaths came shallow, and her mind replayed the past weeks in a frantic loop. Her hands, clenched by her sides, shook slightly, an unspoken reflection of her internal war. She braced herself. Tonight, everything would finally unfold. Standing by a cluster of moonlit rocks, the admirer emerged from the dusk with weary eyes that spoke of desperation. His presence was at once familiar and alien, every line of his face tracing some dreadful story of longing. Marianna halted several paces away, a swirl of disbelief and anger pooling inside her. Anxiety gnawed at her chest, urging her to flee, yet curiosity chained her in place. She recalled the cryptic letters, the unrelenting phone calls, the glimpses of him lurking at the periphery of her life. Confronting him like this felt both terrifying and inevitable, an unbearable necessity. He lifted his gaze, revealing an expression half pleading, half defiant. His voice came out razor thin, slicing through the hush of the evening. He confessed he'd never planned to scare her. He only wanted to feel close, to fix some unfillable void left by people he believed had abandoned him. For years he'd idealized her creativity and gentle charm, constructing a fantasy in which she grounded his chaos. He admitted each step he took, from sending anonymous gifts to following her home late at night, was fueled by a twisted mix of admiration and resentment. He needed her attention, even if it cost them both. Marianna breathed in sharply, waves of revulsion battling a flicker of pity. She remembered her sleepless nights analyzing every cryptic note, every shadow on her blinds. She had once believed she might soothe his torment if only he revealed himself. Yet, hearing his justification sparked a new anguish in her, recognition that his motivations were born from a deep well of loneliness. Anger still scorched the edges of her mind, but now it wrestled with a sudden ache that threatened to topple her resolve. Her throat went dry, the words she had prepared dissolving on her tongue. Compassion mingled painfully with betrayal. He pressed forward, voice cracking under the weight of his confession. Something about the trembling in his hands reminded Marianna of her own vulnerabilities, those unspoken insecurities she carried since childhood. Yet she couldn't ignore the raw harm his obsession had inflicted. Trust had been shattered, and the sense of safety she once held dear evaporated. The last strings binding them to a civilized conversation frayed when he demanded she forgive him, as though his suffering alone deserved absolution. Marianna's expression hardened, and she stepped back, tears stingingly hot against the cold breeze. There could be no simple reconciliation here. The wind seized her hair, casting it across her tear-streaked cheeks, and she tasted salt, both from the sea and her own anguish. She recalled the same promises she'd once made to herself about never letting anyone violate her boundaries. She wanted to scream, to banish him from her life forever. Yet a small voice whispered how heartbreak could only be answered with heartbreak. If she allowed him an inch of empathy, her own scars might never heal. She spat out the words she had been nursing. "We cannot fix this, not tonight, not ever." A hush fell, broken only by the crash of water against rock, echoing her final stand. He flinched as though she had slapped him. Guilt flickered across his features, followed by a desperate twist of hope that refused to die. Marianna felt it too, a faint spark that clung to the notion of closure, some small chance of forging meaning out of this chaos. Under the dull lunar light, her chest tightened, her voice trembling with raw honesty when she said, "I'm sorry you felt so alone. I'm sorry for every night you believed no one heard you." She paused, choking on tears. "But I'm not what you need, and I can't be shattered just to fill what's broken in you." Her words fractured the silence irrevocably. Rage and sorrow rippled through him as he let loose every disappointment, accusing her of leading him on with the smallest gestures, a kind remark, a passing smile. In his mind, those moments had grown into a beacon of salvation. Marianna winced, tumultuous memories surfacing, fleeting conversations where her mind had been elsewhere, unaware of the significance he was constructing. Hearing the extent of his disillusionment gutted her, shaking the remnants of her composure. She realized then, no matter how many times she explained her reality, his interpretation would always linger somewhere beyond reason. Their illusions had forged an unbridgeable gulf. By now the moon had fully risen, bathing the shoreline in an eerie glow. Waves advanced and retreated, as though punishing them both for what they couldn't solve. Marianna's heart crumpled with every resentful word his trembling lips formed, pain superimposed on heartbreak, obsession dissolving into devastation. They stood face to face, thoroughly dismantled. Her tears finally dried, replaced by a numb acceptance that some tragedies can't be undone. She turned away, her feet sinking into the wet sand, carrying her trembling figure toward the winding path. Behind her, he stared at the rolling surf, hollowed by the truth that he had destroyed the very connection he thought he cherished. No final apology passed between them. In the end, there were no second chances or tender embraces. No illusions remained to shield them from the harsh reality that not all wounds are meant to heal. Marianna trudged away from the water, shoulders heavy with the knowledge that heartbreak was sometimes the only form of closure. The horizon darkened, and distant lights winked against the sky, marking a future she wasn't entirely ready to face. Still, she knew she had no choice but to move forward, burdened by her own battered heart and all the shards of an impossible affection. For him, left standing like a lone figure cast in twilight, there was only the faint hiss of the tide, chanting a mournful refrain of loss.